Against the Gods, Chapter 2. Anki lay on his bed, staring up at the ceiling, hearing the echoes of the scream that awoke him not long after night had fallen. A scream that had struck like thunder, fading immediately into dead silence. He shrugged, then hopped up with a growling stomach to follow the smell of his mother's cooking. As he entered the kitchen, he saw his father at the table. Without looking up, he said, "Don't forget we have a gathering at the temple tonight, Anki." His voice low and growling, his eyes bloodshot as they scanned a clay tablet. He didn't have to meet Anki's eyes. It was implied between the two that nothing of the previous night, their conversation or otherwise, was to be mentioned to his mother. Anki took a seat. "Timon, must you read during breakfast?" said Anki's mother next. She spun around from the boiling pot with a wooden ladle swinging back and forth in her plump hand. Along her arms, golden bracelets clinked and clacked with every shake, causing her loose black hair to swing side to side. She glared, then scrunched her lips when he didn't respond. He said, idly acknowledging his wife while mouthing a series of words before yawning. She scoffed and spun around to start beating a pile of dough that would be the bread for a lunch Timon might not receive. What was that, Ninsun? Timon set the tablet down and rose with a stretch to wrap his arms around her. Anki sat to the side, quiet, stifling his own yawn, letting his mind wander back to his own escapades after the scream. He had watched his father leave in a hurry with a harried-looking guard, his father's face betraying a similar anxiety he had never seen before. His voice shaking as he explained that Erda wanted a meeting with the guards. At midnight, Anki had thought. Get real. "Soup, Anki?" Ninsun said, her face now a smile, her ladle scooping out a hearty portion of broth filled with lamb and vegetables into a bowl, a chunk of yesterday's hard bread on the side. He took a big spoonful, grunting with satisfaction. "Thanks. I'm starving today." And no wonder. Through his bedroom window, after Timon had scurried down the road on the heels of that guard, Anki bounded through to follow close at his heels. It was a common tradition that adults consider teenagers too dumb or too sensitive to understand reality in any meaningful way, something he kept in mind while he slipped through shadows, ducking behind walls any time his father looked back with wide eyes. "The dogs in the city have gotten worse, haven't they?" he heard the guard say. A sudden rapid tapping at the house's door brought everyone to a standstill. "Forgive the intrusion." The man bowed slightly, with a rod in his right hand. "Timon, do you have a moment?" A man Anki had never seen before spoke with a quivering voice. He looked familiar, but for the life of him, Anki couldn't remember. He had a large hat, much too big for his head, and a long plaited beard. What in the world is a priest doing here? Anki wondered. Not that it mattered much. He shoveled in another sip of soup with a chunk of bread soaked in broth. Priests weren't fond of giving out information to anyone not in the fold, which was everyone really. Secrecy was woven into the history of this ancient city, into the very foundations, so that, were too many to unravel, they feared a complete societal collapse. He watched his father leave for a second time. In the end, it didn't matter. Come what may," his late grandfather would say. "Just eat, work, pray, until you're dragged kicking and screaming into the underworld, my boy." Besides, he had his own plans to worry about today. It didn't stop him, however, from inclining his ear toward their hushed conversation until his mother said, "Anki dear?" Ninsun said, as he was dabbing another hard chunk of bread into his soup. "Have you given libations?" She already knew the answer. She always knew the answer. If she wasn't cooking, gossiping, or shopping, then she was his incessant reminder to give offerings to the gods. He chugged the remaining bowlful of soup stock with dribbles running down his chin. "I was just about to after I finished eating," he told her, wiping his chin with the back of his hand. She glared at him and then turned back to the beaten dough. Oh, that poor bread would be ruined by the time it was cooked. Ninsun was an Uruk woman through and through. Resilient, faithful, strict, mostly strict. There were a few people Anki had more respect for than her. Few people he truly feared, especially with a ladle in her hand and a scowl that told him, plainly, to get a move on or get slapped. He grabbed the requisite bread and beer and turned out to go to the backyard. Eat, work, pray, then die. Just gotta start working soon so I can die, he murmured. Huh? She turned around with the ladle in her hand, but he had already left through the back door. As he left, his father re-entered, the lines in his face deeper, his eyes more bloodshot, his lips a frown. Timon, Ninsun said, gripping her husband's shoulders in a firm but calming gesture. He made his way to the pot of beer in the corner, taking large slurps from the long straw they all shared. He savored the weedy, sweet taste that made Ninsun so good. The best in the city, and a family secret she wouldn't share. But it wouldn't be enough. Where's Anki? He whispered. He left to give libations. Good, good. Another draught of beer. He didn't need more questions from his inquisitive son. For God's sakes, what happened? There was an incident last night that Erda is adamant about digging into more. He paused for a second to think. He wants me at the temple early to help with records and all that. He let out a sigh and hugged her, gave her a kiss. He started to leave. Around her neck, as many women, hung a pendant for protection, a gnarled, dog-faced visage of the demon Pazuzu. She clutched it, worry lining her face. Pray double for Inanna's protection. I mean it, Timon. Sure, I will. Anki stepped through the back door into the tiny plot of yard behind the house. It wasn't much, a tiny square of dust and dirt surrounded by a brick wall that his grandfather had helped Timon build years ago. To his left, he saw what remained of his grandparents, 2 burial plots, each with ornate straws slanting at different angles. Ahead of him sat what Ninsun called the most holy part of their home. Instead, Anki saw a windowless shack with a tattered curtain covering the small doorway, their holy of holies, another relic from his grandfather's legacy. Thanks, Gramps. You worked and died. He nodded at the grave plot as he passed by. Without further ceremony, he ducked through the curtain, sighed, and then kneeled before the dark bench. It wasn't that he hated giving libations, he just didn't see the point. With a few flicks of metal against the flint, the area glowed with pale light from 2 small candles. Greeting him were the idols that stood as Uruk's patrons, An and Inanna. He met their hollow eyes without a shred of reverence, wanting more than anything to hurry through the prayers so he could enjoy the rest of his day before the whole temple thing with his father that night. He still had no idea what it was, nor did he really care. First, he looked at An, whose blank beige face gazed back at him with a single emotionless line for a mouth. An, god of the sky, he began while placing bread before the idol, whose folded hands did not reach out for the offering. Ungrateful, Anki thought, then smirked in the flickering light. I kneel before you in thanks, and give you this as a symbol of my faith. Next, he placed the beer down, then unceremoniously drank it in place of the idol before crunching the bread. If there was a point to all this, it was drinking his mother's delicious beer. Inanna! He sighed, speaking with his mouth full of soggy bread. I pray for the continued protection for the woman and the newborn, the children and the warriors alike. The beer bit his throat as he guzzled the rest, warming his stomach. That's the stuff. You're missing out, he told Inanna. Her idol was similar to An's, albeit shorter and with breasts. In place of a lined mouth, she smiled. He remained kneeling, the wavering light cast shadows over his shaggy brown hair and the beginning of stubble that was breaking through his skin. It was traditional to remain silent in their presence while they soaked up the bread and beer and the praise and offering that he had given. After a time he knew that would make Ninsun happy, he stood up. "Thanks?" He inclined his head one last time, snuffed the candles, and then pushed aside the sun-baked curtain to head inside. When he walked inside the kitchen, he found Ninsun standing in front of the window gripping her necklace. "Mother?" She jumped, then turned. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing, dear. I was just rehashing old memories." Honky understood where he got his bad lying. He took a deep breath and walked over to the oven to check the bread. "Don't forget to be back before sunset, Anki. Your father's expecting you to go with him to the temple." As much as he wanted to complain about it being a waste of time, he instead chose the wiser option. I know. I'll be back before then. Promise." She shook her ladle at him playfully, then turned back around to the soup. Anki ran out of the door before she should say anything else, leaving the rhythmic stirring behind him. "And without bruises this time," she scolded. That he couldn't promise.